As we gather this morning, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is the first time we've ever done anything like this. And so we're going to open with a word of prayer, and then we're going to move through a number of sharings and kind of get to where we are, and hopefully it'll make more sense as we get here. So why don't we open with a word of prayer? And so, gracious and loving God, still our hearts that we might hear your heartbeat, O God. And so put to rhythm our hearts that they might be in tune with yours, that we might this day and all days be recipients of your grace and proponents of your mercy to the ends of the earth. All of this we pray in the name of Christ, the one who wandered the desert for our sake. Amen. Okay, a couple of things as we get going. First, why are we here? What do we hope to accomplish? We'll kind of start there. We are here today because we'd like to do something that we've never done before, and that is continue in the efforts for financial transparency of the church throughout the church, not just through committees. And frankly, that's a difficult thing to do because it's a big church. You know, it's just hard to do. We print material, meetings are open and all that stuff, but we recognize that even the interested parties can't always make it. And so we're trying this venue for a couple of reasons. To reach as many folks as we can, to record it and the like, but also to remind us that what we're talking about is actually rooted in our spiritual formation. It's rooted in worship. It's rooted in response to the ways that God has given to and for us, and we therefore give in response for what God has given to and for us. So what we're doing today is reminding kind of who we are a little bit and what we do as a church, a little bit of information around the financial stewardship of the church, and an invitation for all of us as a church to prayerfully consider how we can address an acute situation that has presented itself, but that situation we'll talk about in a minute is not without resolution. There's all sorts of pathways out. The finance committee and the ministry council are presenting a pathway to address the matter well before it becomes a matter. Now, I'll confess, this makes me nervous because anytime we talk about church finances, it's generally for two reasons. Historically, it's been to, oh my God, there's a problem, right? Or, oh my gosh, we need your money. And that creates a sense of tension already when people come into the room. So I want to assuage a couple of things. One, there is not a problem. Okay? At present, there is not a problem. What is true is that we have very smart and faithful people in leadership of the church who are looking at a bigger picture and are saying, it is not a problem. However, if we stay on this course as we are, it will become a problem in 10 months. And at that point, it's too late. Does that make sense? So I give thanks for the leadership of the church who sees this and says, we do not have to react in a highly anxious way. We have time to prayerfully and calculatively respond to this situation we find ourselves in. Okay, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is yes, we in fact today will be asking for all of us to prayerfully consider how we might financially support in an increased way. That is part of what we're going to ask today. Historically, it is true that sometimes when church leaders are in situations like this, they will go to the top 5 givers and say, could you please? We are not doing that. We believe that we are all united together and that the situation can be addressed in small ways by all of us. So the ask is for the church, not for the people that are in the know. Are you with me? We say that we are the church. Today is an opportunity to just not give lip service to that, but to respond to that actual proclamation. Does that make sense? So to kind of lead us through this, the first thing we'd like to do is to kind of talk about how we got to where we are on the budget, just so that you have some background information, because some of it may be referred to later. Does that make sense? A few years ago, the church moved into what we call a MAP, M-A-P, MAP process, a ministry action plan. Rather than asking 2 or 3 staff people to create the budget and then ask the church to adopt it, the MAP process created opportunities over several Saturdays for church leaders, both paid and non-paid, staff and department chairs, everybody to come together over the course of several months to articulate where they feel God is calling them in their ministry area to move. Through several hours, there's 3 Saturdays, September, October, November. There's about 30 people that are invited that come to the MAP meeting. They're tasked, they're assigned to do all sorts of things, and then we come back together every month and kind of refine. So that opens up the conversation for the church in all of her ministry areas to be well represented, literally at the same table. Okay? That is laborious. It is. But we know our labor is not in vain, because those conversations help refine and clarify not just the finances, but what direction do we feel God is calling the church? Not just my ministry area, right? It breaks down, or attempts to break down, the silification that tends to happen in large organizations. Anybody been a part of a large organization? You know how it goes. We try to actually undercut the rivalry that sometimes happens between different departments. Again, have you ever experienced anything like that? And you're great, you know? Through that several-month process during stewardship season and the like, a draft budget is created. At the end of December, a draft budget is created. Well, a draft budget was created, and there was an initial 4% increase to the budget from 2023 to 2024. Now, that might not sound like much, because it's not. If anybody remembers last year's inflationary rates, COLA changes, cost of living, it was much higher than 4%. And yet, through that process, the church recognized we actually can live and move faithfully in a direction with a 4% increase. So kudos to the people who are really thinking clearly about this, not just spending money for spending money's sake. That initial budget draft that was in December, which we did not adopt, but after the MAP process, it had a 4% budget increase and a projected decrease on income because of a couple of reasons. One, people move, people retire, and Keller is a wonderful place for people to raise a family and then go to the beach, right? So we had some folks literally move and retire. That's pretty substantial, particularly the number of people who retired, right? Who happen to be larger givers on the whole. We had an increased number of people giving, making pledges. Normally there's 280. This year, we had over 290 pledges. So we had an increased number of people buying in. And yet, as you know, right, those people that make a financial commitment in their 20s and 30s, right, are not at the same levels of those in their 50s and 60s. It's just not how that usually works, right? So increased commitment, but overall decrease on projected income, plus a 4% increase. And a large chunk of that is insurance. One of the largest church insurers in the state of Texas has pulled out of the state of Texas. And I think there's only one, maybe two providers now. And they said, cool, can anybody spell monopoly? So, we are at a projected, in December, we are at a projected draft, which was not adopted, initial $650,000 budget deficit. Okay? We all, as a MAP process, says, let's pause, let's experience the birth of Christmas, and let's get into the new year and see how it shakes out. Okay? So, here we are at the end of all of that, and the current budget that was just adopted at the end of January this year does not have a $650,000 deficit. After further and continued refinement, the current deficit is, I'm so sorry, where is it at? 420, sorry, I should have been more refined. 420. Okay? Sounds like a lot. And it is. As a point of reminder, last year we had a projected deficit of $360,000. But we actually only had a deficit of $222,000. So even our projected deficit didn't come to fruition. How is it that we can keep running a deficit for a couple of years at such high numbers? Does anybody remember the story that Joseph had a dream? Remember this dream story? And he dreamt there were some fat calves, and then some years later there were some skinny calves. You remember this story? That's kind of what we've experienced. We've had some healthy years. And now, maybe you've experienced this in your own life. Last year and this year, we're potentially moving into some lean years. So we can draw down some of our fat calf money, if you will, right? But we cannot continue in that way. Are you with me? We had 3 years of healthy years. This would be year 2 of, or year 3 rather, of lean years. Does that make sense? So therefore, that's why it's not a problem today, right? But come December, it may be a problem if we don't address it now. So that's how we got where we are. And maybe you can see what we're attempting to address today in a specific ask, and we'll talk about that ask in a minute. But before we get there, I do want to highlight that the Finance Committee, the Ministry Council, and the staff do not want this time, the first time we ever do this, to just be about numbers. That's silly. Because we are a people of the book, not a people of the spreadsheets, right? We are a people of the Word, not a people of the numbers, right? And so I want to remind you, the body, the leadership wants to remind us of who we are. It's been said that if you know who you are, then you'll know what to do, right? So, this morning we're going to start with Elizabeth Bass. Elizabeth Bass is our Ministry Council chairperson. Elizabeth Bass, will you share just a little bit from your perspective? Thank you.
I got to put my glasses on for this. Sorry, guys. Well, good morning. Hope everybody's having a good morning so far. I just want to spend a couple minutes. Keith is going to come up in a little bit and talk to us about who we are right now, as Jason mentioned. I'd like to spend a couple minutes talking about where we came from, the history, a little bit of the history of our church. I've had the privilege of being a part of the Legacy Committee that gets to dig through all those boxes, all the stuff, all the history that we have in this church. It's everything from pictures to newsletters, and we're so grateful for the folks who serve on that committee, for Jen Landry, who's back there, who is helping us figure out how to actually archive all this, right, and make it usable for the church. But we have incredible gratitude for those who collected all of that over the years. And so I've had a little opportunity to kind of use some of that information and have some conversations with Miss Tony Bliss, who has been the keeper of that information for many, many years. And so as I was thinking through this and kind of working through some of the history, it just occurred to me that there are so many times in our 126 now year history where, where people made decisions, where this church made decisions that got us to where we are today. So I just want to spend a couple minutes and highlight those for you guys. When I talked with Tony, she wanted to make sure that I understood as I'm talking about this and thinking about this, that the saints who came before us in this 126 years made so many decisions that were focused on the future, not based on what would happen for them, even in their lifetimes, but what would the church be like for their children and grandchildren and those of us who are here today. So just, again, a couple of examples that I thought just really highlighted this for us. So in 1913, I believe, long time ago in our church history, there was some donated land, and our church members, way that long ago, made a decision not to go out and find big construction crews and architects and this and that. They looked around the congregation and said, who can help? And they actually built our first church on Olive Street. Congregation members built that church. So I thought, well, we're talking about money here, right? What was the average cost? What was the average construction cost in 1913? It's about $5,000 to build a house, and that was about the size of that church, right? It was the size of a house that we would build today. But today, that translates to $155,000 that this church didn't spend in 1913. And I realize that's a long time ago, but when you think about the sacrifice that they made to build that church, that potentially set us on a healthy financial road even back then, right? So it just kind of struck me that when we think about our history and think about what this church has done, it's just a great reflection of the stewardship that's been here all along, right? When this church, and many of you may remember this, when this church was moving here to build the original Family Life Center and then to build the sanctuary, there were times when building campaigns were started and we never built anything because it took a while for us to kind of get to where we felt comfortable, right? There's always been times where there's been a need. Maybe we're not there yet, but the church took a chance, eventually got to the point where they took a chance and left Pecan Street, which was hard for members at the time because right across the street was one of the matriarchs of the church, and people had a hard time, as any of us would, saying we need to leave our comfort zone, not because of the people that were there, but because of what the church needed for the future. So eventually the church picked up and brought the money together to build here. And then even when the FLC was built, Tony loves to tell me that they continued that legacy from 1913, that if you were going to come to church in the FLC, you bought your own chair. And people were reminded, did you buy your chair? Did you pay for your chair? And I think Tony told me that Mother Whitley, it was just Mother Whitley, but she bought 4 because she wanted to make sure that when her children came to visit, that they had a place to sit when we were actually worshiping in the FLC. So just, again, examples of this church's stewardship. And this last example that I want to share is where we had an opportunity, saw a need in our community. In 1982, you guys may not, I was not aware, so others of you may not be aware that in 1982, it was a member of our church, Dorothy Plaster, who worked with some other church members in the community. And what is now Community Storehouse, if you all are familiar with Community Storehouse, was Christian Community Storehouse. And it was started right here by church members, including those at Keller. And this church supported that tiny baby organization with prayers, presents, and financial gifts. And that little idea of a couple of church members in this community, including right here at Keller, now serves family and children in 23 cities and 340 square miles. It's unbelievable that we could see a need like that, and by nurturing it through this congregation and others in Keller, that it has been expanded to this level and serves the community the way it does. So I just have been so blessed to have the opportunity to learn about the history of this church through this committee and through my visits with Tony, and I just, really want to make sure that we all are aware of, we've been through this before, right? This is not new. Every church has to have these conversations, but that it is the stewardship and the faithfulness of this community of this congregation for the past 126 years that's allowed us to get to this point. And so it's just a great reflection of who we are because of where we have come from. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Keith, who's going to give us a little more context on some of our current ministries.
Good morning. You'll probably notice Elizabeth had a pad. I have a piece of paper. Technology is not my thing. I'd like to start with a quote from John Wesley. I think many of you have heard it before. And the quote is, "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, so long as you ever can." I really think that speaks to our church. Our church has a very rich history of reaching out to the community. There's lots of different things you could call it. You could call it being in service. You can call it serving others. You can call it turning hearts to God. You can call it being in communion. The point is, our church has always focused on getting out of the building and doing things in the community. I read a book once, and the premise of the book was, you don't participate in a church. You don't come to a church, you go from a church. And our church goes. And what I'd like to do is just share a few things that talk about the service that we have in our community. Some of you will know some of these things, some of you may not. You may know that we have an outreach committee in our church. Pastor Esty and a group of dedicated volunteers work with the city of Keller and other denominations in the city of Keller to promote our church. One of the things that we've done for several years now is the Easter egg hunt in the city of Keller. We are the primary provider of 7 million Easter eggs, 4,000 pounds of candy, and 600 volunteers. And it's great. And we do that, and we like doing that. We have a backpack program for students who are food insufficient. We collect food, we gather it up, and volunteers take it to the various schools. And those children have food for the weekend. All of you know about the Resource Center. We do great work in the Resource Center. We reach so many people. We have had people actually come from as far away as Mesquite to visit our food pantry. In our pantry, we made a decision as a church. We will not turn people away. We will not ask how much money they make. We don't really care. We want you to know if you show up at the Resource Center in Keller, we will provide you with food and clothes. That's in Keller. We have also served our state We have had, as far as I could go back, for 30 plus years, we have sent our junior high youth and our senior high students on mission trips. And we have done work in Arkansas, in Oklahoma, and Texas, and Louisiana. We have sent our youth out to interact with others and help provide them with projects that help them make their house and home a little better. Some of you may remember Hurricane Katrina, 2005. Some of you may also remember it was Rita in 2005. You may not remember that our church participated in mission trips to do recovery work in both of those cities. We gathered people up and we went. We have also served our world. We have sent mission teams to Slovakia to build churches, to sing in the choir, and just participate in the life and the livelihood of people from another country to help share our faith with them and learn about their faith. We've had missionaries in this church who have dedicated a large part of their life to being in Mexico and serving children there. We have sent people to Haiti to build churches and do a water program so people without access to clean water get access to clean water. This year, again, we will send a mission team to Belize to share the gifts and blessings of sight with people. So when people talk about, or to me, when we talk about the Keller United Methodist Church, we talk about a church that is on the move and on the go. We serve people. We want to do more. And it's because of the money that we can raise in our church that we can provide people and services to do those things. So there are a lot more things you can do. I'd be happy to talk to you about all the other things that we do, but I just wanted everyone to remember that we contemporarily, not only have we worked in the past, that legacy that the people before us built, we stand with them and move forward with them. So thank you.
Okay, so as Elizabeth and Keith kind of stay up here we'll talk a little bit about, so in light of all of this, now what, right? So at the start of this year, KUMC had $500,000 in cash, roughly. I'm going to use rough numbers so we don't get too down in the weeds. Now, what's nice about that is, again, that gives us a runway, right? And that sounds like a lot, but that actually is well below the financial floor and basement that those that deal with church audits and make recommendations for a church our size, that's well below what we call the basement, okay? So we recognize that we might be in some leaner years and we can hunker down in basement, that's fine. I grew up and we would go to Missouri, and in Missouri they have basements up there, and some of those basements were amazing. So I'm not afraid of living in basements, and neither should you, and that's fine. However, we know that at some point in time, because of who we are, we cannot live in our basement. We actually go out into the world. We have to leave the walls of this church. And so how are we going to move as a church to address the current acute deficit and build a financial floor so that we may actually go out into God's wide world and to give and to do and to serve in all the ways that we can? So the first thing, there's two sides, as we all know, to the ledger. The first side, the expense side, I'll talk about, and then I'll turn over to Keith to kind of talk about the income side, okay? Whenever there's a church conversation about money, 1,000% of the time, everybody immediately wants to start talking about the expense side, and almost exclusively the expense side. So let's get that out of the way. On the expense side, as I've mentioned, from the initial budget recommendation in December to now, the committees and the staff has already decreased the budget deficit to, 420, 30, whatever, I don't remember what it is exactly, something like that. We also know that historically, we do not actually expense the whole budget, right? The whole deficit. Like we didn't do that last year or the year before. Does that make sense? So there's about a third, historically, about a third of the deficit we probably won't spend anyway. So that 420 deficit that we have on paper, about a third of that probably isn't going to be spent. And a lot of that is just we sometimes bite off more than we can chew. Committees and ministries like, we're going to do this. And then it gets to July and you're like, oh man, Easter's over. We can't do the Easter stuff, right? That just happens. So that's normal. There's obviously staff change and turnover, and there's some time in which, we're looking for folks. And so there's some expenses that actually never get expensed, but they're reflected in the budget. So we know that. We're estimating the historical pattern of about a third of that deficit probably won't be actualized, okay? So that's one side of the expense, or one piece of the expense side. The other side of the expenses is around continuing to promote and articulate how the money in the church is accounted for and spent. And so, as a reminder, all finance committee meetings are open if you're interested. And Melanie Grice provides every month at the welcome desk, on the quick news, and on the website, financial statements for the month. So if at any point in time you've got questions about the expense side, we have committed over these since 2019 or whenever we got here, committed from that point to present to continue to be as transparent and open as we can about the expense side. So if you've got questions about that, know that those are never off limits, okay? Okay, so to be clear, that's kind of the expense side of the ledger on how we're kind of approaching this deficit on one side. Are you with me? Okay, now that's one side. The other side of the ledger, of course, is the income side. And Keith, do you want to speak to the income side? Sure.
One of the things that we've done on the income side is we've tried to find different ways to help the church raise money. And one of the things that we always look at is how can we save money on water. It would probably not surprise anybody as you walk around the grounds that we spend a lot of money on water. And I don't know how far back this goes, but as I'm sitting here, I'm looking at Lou Tyner, who was the chair of the Board of Trustees, and then after Lou, Bob Wetson was the Board of Trustees, and then after Bob Wetson, Jessica Coleman was the Board of Trustee chair, and now Linda Smariga is the Board of Trustees chair. That goes back about 6 years. Well, I'm here to tell you today we are at the goal line of finding a way to drill a well at the church. And we would anticipate that that will save us thousands of dollars in water costs alone. So thank you to the Board of Trustees for all that work, for hanging in there, and the persistence that they have shown to try to help raise money for the church. So thank you. The other thing that came to the Board of Trustees the other day, now we are at the very beginning of this. We have been approached by a cell tower company about the possibility of putting a cell tower on our property that would allow us to generate, I guess you would call it passive income. The cell company takes care of all the installation, maintenance, coverage of the whole thing, and they would pay us a fee plus a percentage of the rent that they get from their tenants. We are at the very beginning. For those of you who live in Keller, it's a process to go through with the Zoning and Planning Commission. There'll be a long time before we get this, but we have started to look at it. So we will also continue to look at ways to help the church raise money that are in keeping with our goals and values. So those are two things that, I hope that, again, I can't tell you how excited the Board of Trustees are about the water well. It's a huge thing. And if after we're done here today, Scott Green, who is our very capable finance chair, and Elizabeth and I, and if Linda is available, we can give you some more details on how we think this will play out and the time frame and the savings and the things it will generate for the church. So we're happy to do that. So that kind of brings us to why we're here today. We are, as Jason and Elizabeth have talked about, we are in a situation where we have an opportunity to make an impact on the deficit. And we are going to try and do that in a way that is, in keeping with our values, in keeping with our goals. Committees and different subcommittees have kicked around a whole lot of ideas on how we do this. Jason referenced going to the larger donors. But ultimately where we ended is we think this is a church-wide opportunity for all of us. So we tried to build a mini campaign, if you will, and keep it very simple and very easy to follow. So this is Also, when Jason told you he closed the doors, he didn't tell you he locked the doors. This is your ticket out. Where is it? It's a pledge card. And it's a typical pledge card. It's got all the information on how you can do it. Melanie and her staff put together, and it's very helpful. But we thought we would do two things. We would have two asks in our campaign. Number one, if you are a person or a family who has not yet made a commitment for 2024, we would ask you to do one of two things. Number one, make a pledge for $10 a week for 2024. Or, number two, make a pledge for $20 a week for 2024. So if you've not yet joined our stewardship campaign, please join. Do $20 or $10. If you have already made a commitment, we would ask you to prayerfully consider adding $10 a week to your pledge or $20 a week to your pledge. We believe if we are successful doing this, and we get about 280 families to participate, between the $10 and $20, we believe we can generate over $200,000 in commitments. And if we can generate an additional $200,000 in income for the church, that will severely reduce the deficit. So when you talk about cutting expenses, we're doing that, and we will continue to do that. But if we can add to this, it will be a big help as well. So again, here's the card. It doesn't say you have to give $10 or $20. If someone is so moved to write a commitment for $1,000 or $1 million, we'll take that too. But the ask is not that. The ask is 10 or 20. Once you get the card, you can leave it here today. If you want to go home and pray on it, take it home, bring it back, put it in the collection plate next week, drop it off at the church. We just want to try to get them back. Now, there is one wrinkle in here that I could never explain. I'm just going to pass this off after we're done. If you have questions, if you are doing a recurring donation where you actually have it taken out of your bank account, you will have to manually go back into your bank account and do that. We cannot go into your bank account and do that for you. So you will have to do that. If you have any questions, call Melanie, call Dan Reed at the church office, and they would be more than happy to walk you through how that process works. So that's it. Simple, clean, we hope effective. And then on the back, it will also tell you how to do those things as well.
Keith? Thank you, Keith. I don't know if I'm on. Hello. Thank you, Keith. One thing to note, or an additional thing to note, visiting with Melanie and the finance team and the people that know the accounting stuff, how it's going to look on your financial statement when you get it, right? It's going to look a little different, okay? If you're increasing your pledge, you'll have 2 lines on your statement, right? The first line is your current pledge, and it's just going to say 2024 commitment, right? The second line will be a whole separate line it'll call finances of the heart, okay? For those of you who are really into the maths, I'm not going to get into it all. And for accounting purposes and for clarity on the back end and for your end, it's all going to be a little different. And it's going to look like this. Let's just say you fulfill your commitment throughout the year and you have a finances of the heart contribution as well. Okay? You'll see the two lines. As you give, as you've increased your giving, it's all going to start filling up your 2024 pledge first. Are you with me? So you might actually meet your pledge, your 2024 pledge, in October, right? And then, because for accounting purposes and for kind of clarity, then you'll start seeing on your statements the finances of the heart increasing as you give to meet that. Does that make sense? So we're not asking that you fulfill your pledge in October and then in December, November, do a finance. We're trying to highlight, as I go back to the beginning of our statements, that what we're doing as a people is turning our hearts to God and neighbor. The turning of our hearts is a gradual and steady and faithful practice, week in and week out. And so to build in finances of the heart now for an increased giving creates the conditions where we actually practice the slow turn towards God and neighbor in our giving. So that's going to look a little different on your statement, but again, as Keith pointed out, if you've got Melanie, everybody knows Melanie Grice. This is Melanie Grice. There you are. Honestly, if you have questions about how it looks or how it doesn't look or some sort of wrinkle in the thing, Dan Reed and Melanie Grice are on the spot. They're working through it with you. Call, email, text, courier, pigeon, whatever is your form of communication, they're on it. I believe our pigeon coop is empty, so we're ready to receive any pigeons that you'd like. Finally, as Keith noted, Scott Green. Scott, can you maybe people don't know Scott Green is our new finance committee chairperson, and he can speak with you more and address any questions that you might have around the budget itself and kind of the directionality of the church on her finances this year. Now it's 10:45, and I want to make sure that we've made space for questions that may bubble up for the body that we can field for a few minutes, and then we'll conclude our time with prayer. So my first question to you is, can I see your hand? Not that you're making a commitment one way or the other. We want to make sure that we are clear on where we are, who we are, the acute situation, the opportunity, and the ask. Raise your hand if all of that is clear to you. Raise it up like a Pentecostal. Get it high. Great. Keep them up for just a second. I'm not trying to be coy. I do want to make sure that we're as clear, because this is the first time, so we're not going to send a feedback form. So, okay, great. Even the kids are doing the Baptist high five, so good job. Okay, great. Okay, now with that, are there any clarifying questions for the body, for the five of us, that may be helpful that you'd like to raise at this time? We have a question here. I'm going to bring this microphone. Make sure that, yep, here we are.
Yes, I was wondering what would the footprint be of a cell tower on the church property, and where would they propose to put it?
Excellent. Great question. Again, as Keith mentioned, this is a very, very early in the process, but Linda Smariga, our trustee chairperson, can address that now. Thank you.
Good morning. This proposal literally was given to the church this week. We had a verbal proposal Tuesday evening. We received a written proposal Friday. So he wasn't kidding, we're at the very beginning. Right now, the trustees are evaluating that proposal. We're including church staff and our experts with accounting and legal to look over everything. And the only decision we're making right now is, are we going to take next steps and move forward to consider this proposal? Or will we tell the tower folks, go somewhere else in Keller? So that's where we are right now. We don't know where we would put it, if we would put it. And I think that was the question that was asked.
Did that address, thumbs up if that addressed the question? Yes? Okay, very good. Thank you. A question, thank you, Linda. Yes, Neil?
Yeah, I wanted, why would we tell the tower people to go someplace else?
Yep. Friends, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. There are 9 members that this body elected through charge conference who are the board of trustees. And this particular matter resides with them. And this is not a trustee meeting. In fact, I don't even get a vote on the board of trustees. Like it is for separation of powers and respect of those individuals who've been duly elected for that work, if you have questions or comments or concerns or points of clarification regarding a proposal, not just limited to cell tower, but anything on the grounds for that matter, please know that the trustees are more than willing and able and happy to field those questions and even invite you to the standing meetings each month. But to Linda's point, this literally is brand new, 1 week old, and I'll confess that I have a tendency to hesitate sharing things sometimes with the church because what gets shared as an idea instantly becomes reality in a lot of our minds, and that's not at all where any of this is, okay? So that's not to squelch the questions, that's just to be mindful of the particular questions for a cell phone tower reside in the, sorry, yes, please, silence, Joy, silence your phone. I'm sorry, silence my phone. So, know that those reside there. We've got some questions here. Yes. Oh. Yeah, you do, because we're recording.
Just don't block our beautiful view.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we've got a question here. Mark, I'm going to slide by here. Excuse me, very good. Here you are, Jimmy. Okay, sorry.
The church property is held in trust at the conference level, right, Jason?
Huh? Yes.
So could the conference say to your cell tower, yeah, that's a great idea, we get the revenue?
Thank you. Again, no, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. They can, again, these are good trustee questions, but the short answer is no. Yes.
Do we have a cost figure on the well?
Yes. There is a cost figure on the well. Do you know it off the top of your head? I believe it's roughly $55,000 has been budgeted for the well. A good chunk of that has already been verbally committed to be covered. And the math works out that in 1.7 years, we will recoup the costs of that well. So there's a very quick ROI. I see you here. I saw one in the back. Yep.
Thank God for an athletic pastor. Great opportunities. Put a lighted cross on the top of the cell tower. But what I question is, I just threw that in for free. My question is, along with what you're looking at, is the church also looking at environmentally friendly ways to reduce costs through solar power, wind, changing some of the grounds so it doesn't require so much water?
Yes, again, I won't, this isn't a trustee meeting. However, Linda Smurry is kind enough to address some of that.
I want to say that the trustees, in keeping with turning hearts to God and neighbor, every decision that we're making this year, we are not just doing kind of like the normal project, we got to repair something. But every time we're doing something, we're looking at it, can we reduce costs? So one of the steps we're looking at right now is we're going to do an energy audit of all of our property to see where we've got gaps, where something's leaking out, and can we reduce our energy costs? So I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you very much. We've got a question here in the back as I come back here, Miss Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just curious, who's the best point person on the cell tower? Because I just want to make sure that I direct some of my concerns about it. Financially, it makes sense, but environmentally, it may not. Or at least I'd like it to be a consideration. So
Sure.
just who is there a point person? Linda?
Linda Smariga. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am. Mhm.
thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Linda Smariga would be that. I saw one question up here from Lou, and here you go. Yes, sir.
First off, about the well, it's a great bit of news, as all of my other trustee presidents, I'm looking, and we're glad to see that. You said a year and a half. If it's truly $55,000, with the amount of water it takes to just keep the grass green, in 1 year, less than a year, that'd be recovered. I think somebody's being very conservative about that. But my real question was, so I know there must have been a lot of gnashing of teeth to go from 605 to 420. I'm sorry I get hung up on numbers. We're at 420. A third of it, you said, about a third, really won't be paid. Or it really won't be used. That's 140. This drive, Keith, your words, about hoping for 200. It still leaves an $80,000 delta. Any words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of the rough approximation is we're trying to address this by way of thirds. A third, decrease expenses. A third, increase income. And a third, through our cash reserves. Because we know that we are going to it's going to take some time to address this problem over time. And two, I'll just be very, very frank. I've had a handful of conversations with folks who have said to me personally, 2024, volatile year, both in the church and in the political sphere. And therefore, we'll see. Right? So it's not, I don't receive it as a threat by any stretch of the imagination, but the reality is there's a lot of collective angst. And when there is collective angst, our minds immediately go to the expense side of the ledger, right? We have some angst here, and there's a lot of talk about the expense side, about the well, it's a great, cool. Or in our personal finances, when we have experienced angst, we start looking at our own expenses and say, what can I cut, right? As a people of faith, I want to remind us, yes, that is important. But that's one side of the ledger. If we're going to mature in Christ, I'm going to end it here because we're at the hour. And for other questions, please know that those are available. But I just want to invite us. If we're going to mature in Christ, we cannot live in a scarcity mindset. It is not possible. It is incompatible with the life and life abundant that God has called us to, and shows every single spring. God is radically abundant, frivolously so, prodigal so much so. Later on today, I'm going to have to go home because there's a stupid tree in my front yard. And that tree every year drops so many seeds, too many seeds if you ask me. Right? But that's how God built the world. There's an overabundance. There is a massive overabundance propagating grace and mercy and kindness and justice and peace and our finances. There is an overabundance. I'm not trying to be a jerk. Somebody told me this morning, they said, Jason, you sound like a Baptist preacher. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but it should signal something to us. I'm not condemning, but it should signal something to us that the questions that we have, both spoken and unspoken, are not questions about our personal contribution side. There's no questions about the income side. Nobody's asking the questions, can I give more than that? Nobody's asking the question, what can I let go of? What can I offer up to share? Are you with me? We're only focused on this side of the ledger. That's fine. That's fine. But we've got two eyes. We've got to see fully and completely. I'm asking all of us, if we're going to mature in Christ, I hope it's abundantly clear to you that this church works diligently on that side of the ledger, faithfully, honestly, transparently, continuously. We got it. I trust everybody that is working on that, and so do you, because you vote them in unanimously every year. But this side of the ledger, I am asking you as a pastor, I'm asking us as a clergy leader to ask the more difficult questions of our heart. What am I holding on to that I will not let go of? What resentments do I carry that keep me from being prodigally generous? What future am I afraid of that I've got to stow up now for what may or might happen? Are you with me? These are much harder questions, which is why I know we ask these questions because they're easier. I don't fault anybody, but these questions are easier. As a people of God, as a community of faith, when we say we're turning our heart, we're hopeful that hearts turn to God and neighbor, we will stand boldly at 1025 Johnson at one of the peak parts of Keller, Texas, and proclaim that the harder questions, the deep questions of our heart that really do transform the world, we will not be afraid of them. We will address them, we will tackle them, and more importantly, we trust that God will transform us in those works. So friends, I hope a charge to keep we have, and that we go forth from this place with the deep and abiding conviction that we together represent the body of Christ, who gave himself for us. What shall our response be? Amen. For those of you who are online, thank you so much. This will be made available digitally later on this week. Go forth in peace. Amen.